Jasmine Crockett walked into a luxury car dealership with $280,000 in hand. But within just 5 minutes, she was insulted and thrown out the door. The manager thought he had won, smug in the belief that he'd removed someone who didn't belong in his world. But less than 24 hours later, Marcus Crockett, her husband, pulled up in a blazing red Rolls Royce and flipped the entire script with one condition no one could refuse. Can a single action, done at the right moment, in the right way, truly change a person? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The sun was fading over Washington, D.C., casting a pale light over empty sidewalks and traffic lights blinking on. Jasmine Crockett had just left a tense hearing at the Capitol, her voice still echoing in the chamber, her pulse steady. She didn't head home. Instead, she drove herself to Capital Star Motors, one of the most exclusive car dealerships in the city, known for catering to powerful people with deep pockets. She wasn't there to browse. She came with purpose, to buy the Mercedes-AMG S63 Coupe, silver, strong, nearly $280,000. Dressed in a clean navy pantsuit, her steps were confident but calm. Around her neck hung a thin silver chain, barely visible, engraved with two simple words: truth over fear. It wasn't for show, it was a reminder. Inside, the showroom sparkled, quiet and polished. She walked straight toward the car she wanted, unaware that her name and everything it stood for was about to become a problem for someone who didn't think she belonged. She had just laid her hand on the hood of the Mercedes when a voice broke the stillness. "Good afternoon, ma'am. It's a pleasure to help you today," the young man said with a bright, respectful tone. Jasmine turned to see him, early 20s, clean-cut, clearly new to the job. His name tag read Tyler and his suit didn't quite fit, but his attitude made up for it. He held a tablet close to his chest, trying his best to look confident. "If you're interested in the S63, I can walk you through anything you'd like," he added, motioning gently to the car as if inviting her to explore, not sell. Jasmine gave him a slight smile. It was rare to be greeted without an ounce of judgment, especially in a city where names came with baggage. For one short moment, the world felt simple, respectful, normal. But before Tyler could finish his sentence, the air in the room shifted, like someone had dropped the temperature without touching the thermostat. There was a pause, so brief most wouldn't notice, but Jasmine felt it instantly. It was the kind of silence that comes not from emptiness, but from expectation. Someone was watching. Then came the sound, slow, confident footsteps clicking across the glossy showroom tile. A man appeared from behind a glass office partition, walking like he had nowhere to be, yet every right to interrupt. Graham Ellis. His name tag said sales manager, but his body language screamed something else, authority mixed with quiet entitlement. He was in his mid-40s, lean but stiff in his movements, like someone who had taught himself posture from expensive seminars. His suit fit well, dark gray, not flashy, but just enough to say, "I'm above this." His polished shoes left faint echoes behind him. He didn't speak right away. He didn't have to. His eyes scanned the scene, the car, Tyler, then Jasmine. But when his gaze landed on the silver chain around her neck, he stopped. 3 words were etched there: truth over fear, small enough to miss, but not for him. That was all he needed. His face didn't twist, didn't sneer. That would be too obvious. No, his change was subtle. The corners of his mouth pressed together. His head tilted ever so slightly. His eyes narrowed, not in surprise, but in recognition. And then he stepped forward. "Excuse me, Tyler," he said, cutting between the young salesman and Jasmine, like they weren't even there. "I'll take it from here." Tyler hesitated, one foot still angled toward Jasmine. But Graham didn't wait for him to move. He turned fully toward her now, folding his hands in front of him like a principal about to give a lecture. "You're Jasmine Crockett, aren't you?" he asked, voice steady, lips barely parting. "Congresswoman, right?" Jasmine looked him in the eye, silent. "Democrat," he continued, the word hanging in the air just a fraction longer than necessary. It wasn't a greeting, it was a warning, and it landed hard. It was the tone, not what he said, but how he said it. neutral on the surface, but lined with quiet disdain, like he was trying to figure out whether she was lost, joking, or simply didn't understand where she was. Like this wasn't her space to walk into. There was no offer of help. No welcome to Capital Star Motors. Just the implication, clear as day. You don't belong here. Tyler took a small step back, lips parted as if to say something, then thought better of it. He could feel it too now, that unspoken shift in atmosphere. The manager hadn't raised his voice, but somehow everything felt louder, tighter. The soft jazz playing overhead suddenly felt out of place, like music playing during a fire alarm. He let out a soft laugh, sharp and humorless. "You know what's funny?" he said, voice louder now. "People like you, always on TV, always preaching about the little guy, the poor, the broken system, then show up to buy a Mercedes that costs more than a teacher makes in 5 years." He nodded slowly, as if trying to convince himself of something. "Must be nice. All that fighting for the people really pays off, huh?" Jasmine stood still, her eyes locked on his. She said nothing. She didn't need to. His words were spilling fast now. He'd cracked open the door and couldn't stop himself. "Let me guess," he continued. "Campaign funds? Political donors? Or just a little off-the-books bonus for voting the right way?" He chuckled again, and this time it was louder. More people heard it. 2 junior sales guys over by the front desk looked up. One of them smirked. The other shook his head. Graham took a step closer, not aggressive, just invasive enough to show he wasn't afraid. "It's always the same story," he said. "You talk about fairness, equality, lifting people up, but the second you get a taste of money, of power, suddenly it's leather seats and German engineering, isn't it?" He motioned to the S63 coupe behind her. "You know what this car is? This car is for people who understand where they are, who play the game right, who earn their place." He looked her up and down again, not with interest but with judgment. Not people who show up thinking slogans and speeches are enough. Tyler finally took a slow step back, shoulders tense. He wasn't trained for this. Nobody had told him what to do when a manager decides to insult a sitting member of Congress. But Graham didn't care who Jasmine was. Or maybe he did, and that was the problem. He shook his head as if disappointed in her personally. "I don't care what title you've got, Congresswoman," he said. "You walk into a place like this wearing that little necklace." He pointed lightly at her pendant, truth over fear, "and acting like you belong. That's bold." Then he smiled finally. It wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile you wear when you think you've just put someone in their place. But bold doesn't mean welcome. And with that, he turned slightly, as if he were already done, as if the decision had been made. "You don't belong here, and I've made sure everyone knows it." Graham's last words hung in the air like a challenge, smug and final, as if he delivered the closing line of a play he thought he'd already won. Jasmine stood completely still. Her body didn't tense. She didn't roll her eyes, she didn't scoff, because she'd been here before. Maybe not in this exact room, not in front of this exact man, but in this exact moment, where someone in a position of just enough power tries to make you feel small, where disrespect is slipped into conversation like it's just business, where you're pushed to react because your reaction will become the real problem. She inhaled slowly once, then she spoke. "I'm here as a customer," she said calmly, clearly, eyes locked onto his. "Not a politician." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The way she said it, measured, grounded, made every syllable ring louder than anything Graham had thrown at her. "I came in because I liked the car. I didn't bring a camera crew. I didn't bring press. I didn't bring politics. You brought that into the room the second you opened your mouth." Graham shifted slightly, not backing down but no longer leaning in. His posture froze. Not defensive, but not as smug as before. Jasmine took one slow step forward, not threatening but firm. Her presence filled the space in a way no shouting ever could. "I don't owe you a breakdown of my bank account," she said. "I don't need to explain why I can afford this car or justify how I spend what I've earned. I didn't come here to debate my integrity. I came here to buy a machine, not be measured like one." She paused, letting it settle. Tyler, off to the side, silent till now, shifted his weight, swallowing hard. He wasn't sure what to do, but even he could feel it. The temperature in the room had changed. Jasmine had taken back the ground under her feet. "If you had a problem with my politics," she added, voice tightening just slightly, "you could have kept that to yourself. But you chose to make it personal. You wanted to remind me that this space, this showroom, this car, this price, wasn't meant for people like me." The silence that followed Jasmine's words was heavy, not empty, but loaded. You could feel it pressing against the windows. Tyler didn't move. He looked down at his shoes, like they might offer instructions. A few of the other employees drifted farther into the background, not out of respect, but avoidance. No one wanted to be part of what was coming. Jasmine, she was still standing there, calm, composed, but her patience had an edge now, and Graham felt it. He said it like it was a policy, like it was printed on the back of the showroom wall. But it wasn't. It was personal. Everyone could feel it. "Our brand," he continued, "caters to a very specific kind of client. Professional, traditional, tasteful." The way he said that last word, tasteful, dripped with quiet insult. Like Jasmine didn't belong simply because she wasn't wearing the right kind of privilege. He glanced at her necklace again, truth over fear, as if that alone was proof she was out of place. Then he folded his arms, head tilted, a fake expression of regret plastered across his face. "You've made your point. Now I'm making mine," he said. "You're not welcome here, Congresswoman. I'm asking you to leave." A pause, no movement, no reaction, just that chilling stillness again. Then came the final, deliberate blow. "If you choose not to, I'll have security escort you out." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. That was the real strategy. He wanted everyone to hear her being removed, but no one to hear him remove her. His words were dressed in formality, but the intent was as raw as it gets. "You don't belong here. You never did. Now get out." The injustice wasn't loud. It was polite, polished, and practiced, and that's what made it so cruel. Jasmine didn't move right away. Her spine stayed straight, shoulders square. No emotion cracked her face, but something behind her eyes shifted, something subtle. Not defeat, but finality, like a door had just closed, not behind her, but on them. She turned her head slowly, looked once more at the car she had come to see, the one she wasn't even allowed to touch, and then turned back toward the glass doors. She didn't say another word. She didn't need to. Her heels clicked across the marble, each step crisp and measured. Not rushed, not angry, just done. The kind of walk that says, "You didn't win, you revealed yourself." Tyler, still standing a few feet away, looked pale. His eyes met hers for a second, and he whispered just loud enough for her to hear. I'm sorry." She paused at the door, looked at him. No smile, just a simple, quiet nod. The kind you give someone who almost did the right thing. Then she pushed through the door and stepped back out into the cold. The wind met her like it had been waiting, sharp, fast, and real. She walked across the mostly empty parking lot, passing rows of polished machines that gleamed in the showroom's reflection like trophies in glass cages. Her car, the Honda Accord, sat parked near the far end, where the shadows stretched longer. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't new, but it was hers. It had gotten her through law school, campaigns, late-night flights, and early morning strategy calls. And now, it was where she went to breathe. She slid into the driver's seat and closed the door with quiet hands. No slamming, no sighing, just stillness. She stared straight ahead, gripping the steering wheel lightly, her face unreadable. The cold from the outside hadn't left her coat yet, but what chilled her wasn't the weather. It was what had just happened. She could still hear Graham's voice, his fake calm tone, the way he used brand values as a weapon, like she'd violated a dress code instead of being humiliated. She remembered the way he looked at her necklace, like it said something offensive instead of something true. She remembered the fake chuckle about taxpayer money, the way two employees laughed along quietly, the room full of bystanders who said nothing. She finally blinked, reached into her coat, pulled out her phone. Unlocked. One contact. Marcus Crockett. She hit call. It didn't even ring twice. Jazz? His voice came through, low, calm, but alert, like he already knew something was wrong. She didn't hold back. I went to the dealership, she said, her voice level, but clipped at the edges. I wanted to look at the Mercedes, the S63, the one we talked about. I walked in, was greeted by a new kid. Sweet, nervous, probably 22. Name was Tyler. He was nice. Actually nice. Treated me like a real customer. She paused, then added, for about 90 seconds. Marcus stayed quiet on the line. Then the manager came over. Graham Ellis, mid-40s, slick suit, slick smile. He saw me, looked at my necklace. Didn't say anything at first, then he realized who I was. Called me out, loud enough for other people to hear. Her voice remained steady, but there was an edge now. Tight, thin, razor sharp. He asked if I was Congresswoman Crockett, Democrat. Like that was an offense. She shook her head slowly. Then it started. The usual. Said it was funny someone like me wanted a car like that. Said maybe I was using campaign donations or taxpayer money. Said the dealership catered to a specific kind of client. You know what he meant. Marcus breathed once, slow and deep. Then he told me I didn't belong there. And when I didn't walk out fast enough, he said he'd call security. She added, not yelled, not screamed, just calmly, like he was asking me to take off muddy shoes before stepping into a rich man's house. There was another long pause. Jasmine could almost see her husband's expression forming on the other end of the line. He didn't get angry often, not in ways people expected. He didn't yell. He calculated. And Jasmine knew that tone. When he went quiet like this, it wasn't calm. It was controlled. I know exactly what I need to do. And that was it. Not a single question, not a single doubt. Jasmine leaned back in the seat, her breath finally breaking the silence inside the car. The windows had started fogging from the contrast of her warmth and the outside chill. She didn't wipe them. She let them blur. Because whatever Graham Ellis thought he had accomplished by making her walk out that door, whatever superiority he felt for putting her in her place, he had no idea what she had just set in motion. The next morning, Capital Star Motors opened its glass doors like any other weekday. The sky was overcast, the streets quiet, and inside, the showroom buzzed with soft chatter and the hum of sales talk layered over jazz music. Graham Ellis, rested and self-assured, stood near the central display, reviewing specs on a tablet while making small talk with a couple eyeing a Bentley Continental. He wore a fresh suit, light gray with a deep blue pocket square, and the same smug energy he carried every day, especially after a so-called win like the day before. He hadn't said much to the staff about the incident, just shrugged it off. Some people just don't fit the brand, he had muttered, half laughing. And then, without warning, the temperature in the showroom seemed to drop, not by the thermostat, but by instinct. A sound rolled in from outside, not loud, not urgent, but deep, solid. A low, velvety engine growl, tuned so perfectly it sounded more like a heartbeat than machinery. A few heads near the windows turned. One of the junior associates leaned forward against the glass, brow rising. A Rolls-Royce Phantom, crimson red, black trim, chrome so polished it mirrored the sky, glided across the dealership's private drive like it owned the pavement. It didn't park. It arrived. When the engine faded into silence, it wasn't just quiet. It was deliberate, intentional. Everyone looked. Inside, Tyler, standing near the reception desk, froze mid-sentence. His eyes widened the second the door to the Phantom opened. Then came Marcus Crockett. He stepped out with no rush, no show. He didn't need theatrics. His presence carried weight the way old buildings carry history. Solid, unmoving, impossible to ignore. His charcoal gray suit was tailored to precision, the coat slightly unbuttoned. He wore no tie, just a crisp white collar open at the throat, like someone who'd walked out of a war room, not a boardroom. He didn't pause to look around. He didn't need to orient himself. He knew exactly where he was going. And the moment he stepped through the glass doors, The room changed. Not immediately, not loudly, but absolutely. Conversation stopped mid-word. Clients lowered their voices without realizing why. The showroom's carefully curated atmosphere of calm luxury cracked at the edges. Not because Marcus said anything, but because of what he carried with him. Presence, purpose, and pressure. He walked like a man who had no interest in introductions, only outcomes. Graham, still by the Bentley, glanced casually over his shoulder at first, expecting a new high-profile client to charm. But the second his eyes landed on Marcus, the color in his face began to fade. He tried to fix his expression, tried to square his shoulders, but his hand tightened around the edge of the tablet without him noticing. His smirk evaporated. The posture stayed, but the confidence behind it had cracked. Tyler, now standing to the side, whispered under his breath, "Oh my God," and stepped slightly back, as if he knew something bigger than a sale was about to unfold. Marcus didn't stop. His gaze was locked on one person. No glances left or right. No greetings. No smiles. He reached the center of the showroom, directly across from Graham, and came to a slow, deliberate stop. He said nothing, but he didn't need to. Every person in that room knew the power had just shifted, and it wasn't subtle. Graham stood rooted in place as Marcus closed the distance between them, each step purposeful, heavy with intent. He tried to hold on to the performance, chin up, shoulders square, but his eyes betrayed him. That same confidence he had worn the day before, like a badge, was fading by the second. Marcus stopped just a few feet away, posture relaxed but unreadable. His voice came low and calm, not a threat, but a reckoning. "You didn't turn my wife away yesterday because she couldn't afford the car," he said, locking his gaze on Graham. "You turned her away because you couldn't stand who she is." Graham shifted. "That's not fair," he said quickly, a nervous chuckle in his throat. "She came in with an attitude." "No," Marcus cut in, not louder, just sharper. "She came in with confidence. You mistook that for something else. Or maybe you just couldn't stand the sight of it." Graham lifted his hands halfway, defensive now. "Look, I didn't know who she was at first. And when I realized—" "That was the problem," Marcus interrupted, eyes unblinking. "You recognized her, and instead of offering her the same respect you give every other wealthy customer that walks through those doors, you chose to humiliate her." Graham straightened, trying to recover. "I was trying to protect the integrity of the brand. We serve a very specific clientele." Marcus took a step closer. His voice dropped lower. "You mean white. You mean traditional. You mean compliant. Don't dress it up. You saw a woman who didn't fit your picture of who should own a six-figure car, and instead of adjusting your picture, you decided to make her feel like she was the one out of place." Graham's tone turned defensive, tight. "That's not what happened. I have the right to refuse service. It's nothing personal." Marcus's face stayed stone calm. "It was entirely personal. You called her out by name. You made a scene. You questioned her finances, her profession, her integrity." "She was wearing that necklace," Graham said quickly. "Truth over fear, right? That's political." Marcus didn't flinch. "It's principle, something you clearly confuse with partisanship." He stepped forward again, still not threatening, just utterly immovable. "My wife isn't just a congresswoman. She's a civil rights attorney who's fought for people you'll never understand. She's been harassed, doxxed, targeted, and yet she walked in here, on her own, expecting to be treated like a customer, not a problem." Graham was quiet now, cornered not by volume, but by facts. You don't have to vote for her. You don't have to like her policies, but the moment you use your job to try and humiliate her for what she represents, you crossed a line. Marcus's voice hardened, not louder, just colder, like stone closing around a truth. "You don't get to weaponize customer service to push people out. You don't get to use polite words to hide real hate. And you definitely don't get to make my wife feel small, because she had the nerve to walk in here with pride in who she is." The silence in the showroom was now absolute. No phones rang, no keys clacked, no footsteps moved. Even Tyler, standing frozen at the edge of the floor, barely seemed to breathe. Graham's mouth was slightly open, but no words came. The excuses had run out, because Marcus Crockett hadn't raised his voice. He had just taken back the room. The silence that followed Marcus's final words was thick enough to stop time. It pressed down on every corner of the showroom, making even the air feel heavier. No one dared to speak, not the clients still frozen near the display cars, not the junior sales staff, and certainly not Graham Ellis. And then, footsteps, measured, expensive, the kind that announce power before the man himself arrives. From a hallway off the private offices, a new figure stepped into view. Mid-60s, tall, lean, navy blue suit, salt white hair, glasses like a signature. This was Clarence Devlin, owner of Capital Star Motors, the man who didn't show up unless something was at stake. And clearly, something was. "Mr. Crockett," he said smoothly, extending a hand, "I'm Clarence Devlin. I understand there's been some misunderstanding." Marcus didn't move at first. He looked Clarence up and down, assessing not the suit, but intent. Then slowly he shook the man's hand. Firm brief, no smile. "Mr. Devlin," Marcus said, "this isn't a misunderstanding. It was crystal clear." Clarence nodded once, eyes flicking to Graham, who looked like he wanted to disappear. "I assure you, we don't condone that kind of behavior here. I'll speak to my staff personally." "I'm not here for apologies," Marcus replied calmly. "I came for accountability." The words settled with a chill. Clarence blinked, but didn't interrupt. "I'm still willing to buy the car. The exact model my wife came in for, the S63 Coupe. No discounts, no handouts. I'll pay in full today, as she intended yesterday. But it will come with one condition. Your sales manager, Mr. Ellis, will attend a gala next week. It's called Unity and Honor, fundraiser for disabled veterans. My wife is hosting it. She helped build it. It's not political, it's human." Clarence's posture shifted. He was doing math, calculating risk. "If he agrees," Marcus said, "we close the sale today, clean, professional. If he refuses, I walk out, and every client I work with, from Boston to San Diego, will hear exactly what happened here. I don't need headlines. I just need a phone call, maybe two. I'm still willing to buy the car," he said. "The exact model my wife came in for. The S63 Coupe. No discounts, no handouts. I'll pay in full today, as she intended to yesterday." He paused. "But," he continued, eyes locking on Clarence now, "it will come with one condition." The room held still again. Even Graham's breath caught. Marcus's tone was steady but sharp as steel. "Your sales manager, Mr. Ellis, will attend a gala next week. It's called Unity and Honor. It's a fundraiser for disabled veterans and their families. My wife is hosting it. She helped build it. And it's not political. It's human." Clarence's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted. He was listening now, not like a businessman, but like a man trying to do math on damage. "If he agrees," Marcus said, "we close the sale today, clean, professional." Another pause. Marcus leaned in just slightly, voice lower, colder. "If he refuses, I walk out, and every client I work with, from Boston to San Diego, will hear exactly what happened here. I don't need headlines. I just need one phone call, maybe two." Graham's mouth opened, then shut. His hands clenched behind his back. The blood had left his face. Clarence cleared his throat. "Mr. Crockett, I hope you understand. Our dealership doesn't take sides. We serve everyone equally." "No," Marcus replied instantly. Graham didn't. His words hit like a gavel. "And your silence up until now says plenty about what you were willing to let slide until it got inconvenient." Clarence didn't argue. He didn't have ground to stand on. In the background, Tyler stood near the service counter, his tablet hanging limp in his hands. His eyes were locked on Marcus, not with fear, but something closer to awe. He'd never seen a man take over a room without raising his voice, without flexing, just pure surgical presence. Clarence turned toward Graham. "You'll attend the gala," he said, firm. Not a suggestion, an order. Graham blinked. "Sir, with respect." "This isn't about respect anymore," Clarence cut in. "It's about consequence." Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. He let that land. Then he nodded once. "I'll have the paperwork ready within the hour," he said. Clarence gave a quiet nod, then turned to a nearby assistant and muttered something under his breath. Graham still hadn't moved. Marcus took one last look at him, not with rage, not even with judgment, just cold clarity. "You tried to make my wife feel like she didn't belong," he said. "Now you'll spend one evening face to face with people you don't think count, people who've given more than you ever will. And maybe, just maybe, you'll learn what belonging actually looks like." He didn't wait for a reply. He walked off toward the showroom's central lounge, where Tyler was already fumbling to gather documents, his fingers shaking slightly. The tension lingered behind him like smoke, because everyone knew what had just happened. Marcus Crockett hadn't just bought a car. He'd reset the balance of the entire room. Following the silence Marcus Crockett left behind at the dealership, a different kind of noise began to fill Graham Ellis's life, one he wasn't used to. It wasn't outrage, not scandal, not calls from superiors. It was something quieter, something heavier, reflection. And for the first time in years, he didn't have a script to talk his way through it. When the day of the Unity and Honor Veterans Gala finally arrived, he didn't show up with pride, not with protest, but with reluctant obligation. An a pressed black polo shirt, no name tag, no clipboard, just instructions: assist where needed, be respectful, stay visible. He had wanted to send someone else. Devlin refused, so here he was, inside the glittering ballroom of the Grand Hyatt Washington, its chandeliers glowing like frozen fire above a crowd he never thought he'd stand among. No sales floor, no branding, just people. American flags lined the stage. Rows of round tables were dressed in deep navy cloth, flanked by gold-backed chairs, and seated at many of them, the men and women whose lives had been marked by sacrifice, veterans of every age, some laughing with families, others sitting quietly, wearing medals instead of pride. Graham didn't speak as he moved through the space. He didn't know how. He didn't know what to say to people who had faced things he'd only read about, in articles he never finished. At the registration table, he was handed a volunteer badge and a duty. Assist Mr. Henry Morales, Vietnam-born, American citizen, Purple Heart recipient, Afghanistan combat vet, now in a wheelchair after a roadside IED shredded both his legs near Kandahar. Graham's first instinct was hesitation. He didn't feel qualified. He wasn't. But there was no time to dwell. He found Mr. Morales near the front of the ballroom. Late 60s, deeply tanned skin, square jaw, white crew cut under a navy cap with faded yellow embroidery. 101 St. Airborne. No slack. His hands rested calmly in his lap, knuckles scarred, one finger missing. He looked up at Graham, not with suspicion, not with warmth, just curiosity. "You my ride tonight?" he asked, voice dry but not unkind. "Yes, sir," Graham replied quietly. Henry nodded once. "Then let's roll. They're doing the flag ceremony soon." And so they moved, through polished floors and crowded aisles, past senators in tuxes and women in sequins. Graham didn't say much, neither did Henry, but something about the silence between them felt different, honest. As they reached the front rows, Graham adjusted the angle of the chair, then took a seat behind him, hands resting loosely on his knees. He looked around at the room, this time not as a showroom or a networking hub, but as a place filled with people who didn't ask to be applauded, but who deserved it anyway. On stage, a young woman began to sing the national anthem. The room rose slowly, unevenly, some with strength, others with help. Henry remained seated, but he placed a hand over his chest. When the anthem ended, the speaker took the podium and began to call names. Veterans of specific units, conflicts, and acts of valor. And with every name came applause. Every story came weight. Beside him, Henry would sometimes nod quietly, recognizing a name, a place, a tone in someone's voice. At one point, Henry whispered, "He was in my unit," took shrapnel to the face, still pulled 3 guys out under fire. Graham said nothing, but his jaw tightened. These weren't statistics. They were stories, real ones, carried in bodies that still hurt, memories that still returned at night. Later, while pushing Henry through the reception area toward the banquet hall, Graham finally spoke. "You still talk to any of them?" Henry raised an eyebrow. "My guys?" "Yeah, not all of them. Some drank too much. Some just disappeared. But yeah, a few." Pause. "You?" Graham blinked. "Me? I've never served." Henry smiled faintly. "Didn't say served. Said your guys. The ones you show up for. You got any?" Graham didn't answer. Not because he didn't have one, but because he'd never thought about it like that, about showing up for anyone, without a paycheck attached. The question stayed with him longer than he wanted to admit. As the evening continued, Graham helped distribute programs, poured coffee, fetched extra utensils for older guests, even held a door open for a double amputee Marine named Mike, who cracked a joke about dropping his prosthetic if Graham made a wrong turn. And somewhere in that process, the transactionless kind of service, something shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but it did, because the room was full of people who, by his own assumptions, he'd written off. Men in faded uniforms, women in worn dresses with military pins instead of diamonds, people who didn't ask him where he was from, or what he believed, or what side he voted on. People who treated him kindly, not because he deserved it, but because they chose to. And Graham realized, this was the crowd he thought Jasmine Crockett didn't deserve to be part of. But these were her people. They always had been. She wasn't pretending to fight for America. She was fighting beside the very people he once ignored. Near the end of the night, as the lights dimmed and a final speaker took the stage, a mother who'd lost a son in Ramadi, Graham found himself gripping the handles of Henry's wheelchair a little tighter. The woman's voice was steady, but her story was not. She spoke of a knock on her door, a folded flag, a lifetime of birthdays, with one seat empty. And she ended not with anger, but with a simple message. Sacrifice doesn't come with a party badge. It just comes with love and silence, and sometimes strangers who are willing to listen. When the applause finally rose again, quiet, respectful, Graham didn't clap at first. He stared forward, eyes glossed but dry, chest tight. Henry looked back. "Heavy night, huh?" Graham nodded slowly. "Yeah. You'll remember it," Henry said. "You don't have to tell anybody. Just don't forget." As the crowd began to file out, Graham wheeled Henry toward the elevators, past rows of flags and photographs and honor boards. For the first time in a long time, he felt small, in the right way, like someone who had just walked into a room full of giants and had been allowed to stay. He didn't know if it would change everything, but it changed something. And for a man like Graham Ellis, that was already more than anyone expected. The gala was beginning to wind down, but the weight in the room had not lifted. Even as servers quietly cleared tables and a jazz trio played soft closing notes, something sacred still lingered in the air. The kind of silence that follows truth. It wasn't the hush of politeness anymore. It was the sound of hearts working hard to hold emotion in place. Graham stood near the edge of the banquet hall beside Henry Morales' wheelchair. The old veteran had been quieter these last few minutes, his body tired but his eyes still sharp. Graham didn't know what to do with his hands, so he rested them on the back of Henry's chair, unsure whether to stay or disappear into the shadows. He hadn't planned to stay this long. He hadn't expected to feel anything. But now, after the stories, the faces, the folded memories, he was standing in a place he didn't feel he'd earned the right to be in. Then he heard her voice. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Mr. Ellis." He turned, slowly, carefully. Jasmine Crockett stood a few feet behind him, in a navy blue gown with clean lines and no flash. A single pin rested on her chest, a silver eagle wrapped in ribbon, the insignia of the event. Her hair was pulled back, her posture was calm, and her expression wasn't angry. It was just still. "I didn't think you'd come," she said quietly, with a calm that somehow struck deeper than confrontation ever could. Graham looked down, not as a tactic, not in shame. It was simply instinct, because everything he'd believed about her, what she was, what she represented, what she threatened in him, had collapsed in that ballroom over the past 2 hours. When he looked back up, his voice was quieter than usual, stripped of showmanship, just real. "I was wrong," he said, each word deliberate. "I thought you were a headline, a symbol, a politician with a platform." He shook his head slightly. "But tonight I saw the people who trust you. I saw the room you built, the voices you stand with. And I realized your name isn't what gives you power. Your heart does." He paused, then added softly, "I didn't want to see it before, because if I saw it, I'd have to admit how little I understood." Jasmine didn't react right away. She stood still, watching him, not as an adversary, not even as a skeptic, just present, as if weighing whether to believe the words or the man. And then from the side of the conversation came a voice deeper than both. "Ma'am," Henry Morales said, shifting in his wheelchair, glancing up with a small, dry smile. "I know this guy messed up bad, but he's not faking this." Jasmine looked at him. Henry nodded toward Graham. "Been pushing me around all night, even helped me fill out the VA paperwork I've been putting off for 2 years. He shrugged. "Didn't complain once." Graham looked surprised. He hadn't even thought it mattered. He just did it. Henry continued. "I've had suits talk down to me, step over me, use me as a photo op. But this one, he listened. And that counts for something." Jasmine's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. Her arms were still folded, but something in her shoulders eased. Graham spoke again. "I don't expect you to forgive me. Honestly, I wouldn't if I were you, but I wanted to be here. Not because Marcus told me to, not because my boss forced my hand, because after yesterday, I couldn't forget how I looked at you, and how wrong that was." His voice cracked just slightly, not from emotion, but from the weight of truth finally leaving his chest. "I wanted to make you feel like you didn't belong," he admitted, "because deep down, I was afraid you did." That landed, not just for Jasmine, but for Henry, and for two nearby guests who'd paused just long enough to listen. Jasmine stepped a little closer. Her heels made almost no sound on the polished floor. "I've had people yell at me, threaten me, undermine me," she said. "That comes with the job." She looked him dead in the eye. "But what you did wasn't just about politics. It was personal. You used your position to make me feel small, and you did it with a smile. That's what cut the deepest." Graham nodded, ashamed. "I know. But," she added, "you're here. You showed up. You listened. And from what Henry's telling me, you didn't come to be seen. You came to serve. That doesn't erase what happened, but it matters." Graham swallowed hard. "Thank you." Henry gave a small chuckle. "Hell, I might even let him push me around next year if they do this again." Jasmine smiled then, a real one. It didn't come quickly. It didn't come easily. But it came. "I won't lie," she said, looking at both of them. "There was a moment yesterday where I thought, he'll never understand. He's too far gone." She looked back to Graham. "I'm glad I was wrong." The trio stood there, surrounded by the soft clinking of glasses, the fading music, and the quiet murmurs of 100 conversations. Graham exhaled. His posture relaxed for the first time that night. He still felt out of place. But now, in a good way, because growth always feels a little uncomfortable. Jasmine placed a gentle hand on Henry's shoulder, then turned to Graham one last time. "Next time someone like me walks into your showroom," she said, voice even but pointed, "don't wait for a second chance to treat them right." "I won't," he said. He meant it, and she knew it. As she turned and walked toward the far end of the ballroom, where Marcus waited by the exit in a sharp black tuxedo, Graham stayed beside Henry, silent, thoughtful. He watched as Jasmine crossed the floor. She wasn't walking like someone victorious. She walked like someone anchored, not by pride but by purpose. And in that moment, Graham Ellis finally understood what he'd never understood about her. She didn't carry power the way he was used to seeing it. Loud, visible, transactional. She carried it quietly. She carried it with people. As Jasmine walked away into the golden-lit end of the ballroom, Graham remained still, grounded beside Henry's wheelchair. The music was softer now, nearly faded. Guests were beginning to disperse, old friends hugging, veterans exchanging numbers. But Graham didn't move. Something about that conversation had rooted him in place. Not frozen, not ashamed, just humbled. He had come expecting a public reprimand. What he got instead was forgiveness, offered without demand. It left him with a strange ache, one that wasn't guilt, but recognition. And then he felt it, another presence. He turned. Marcus Crockett was approaching, calm and composed as always, but something new in his face tonight. Not the cold, businesslike stare Graham remembered. This was a man who had seen the whole picture and was deciding what to do with it. Dressed in a sharp black tuxedo, salt and pepper beard neat, Marcus walked with hands clasped behind his back. He stopped just short of Graham. In his right hand, he held a manila folder. No fanfare, no small talk, just the moment. Marcus offered the folder. Graham hesitated for half a second, then accepted it. Inside, purchase orders, specifications, fleet pricing, 6 fully equipped SUVs, Mercedes GLS models, designated for a national community safety program across 3 states. No press releases, no headlines, just logistics, supply chain, execution. You'll handle it, Marcus said, voice calm, measured. If you continue holding yourself the way you did tonight. Graham blinked. He opened the folder again as if to be sure. This is... He trailed off, unable to find the right word. Marcus nodded. Real. The silence between them held not tension, but truth. This isn't charity, Marcus continued. We have other vendors, bigger ones, faster ones. But this particular project involves community workers in South Dallas, Detroit, and parts of Baltimore, areas you once might have written off. If you treat those teams the way you treated my wife, Marcus added, tone tightening just enough, we'll pull the deal midstream. No hesitation. Graham nodded. Understood. Another beat. Marcus exhaled slowly, then extended his hand. Graham didn't reach for it immediately. He stared at it, remembering the last time they stood in a dealership, when that hand was a symbol of everything he had lost. But now it wasn't pity. It was a test and an invitation. Graham finally reached forward and shook it. Firm, honest, no script. His voice cracked, not from emotion, but sincerity too unfamiliar to feel smooth. Thank you, he said. Not for the contract, not for the numbers, but for the chance to make it right. Marcus held the handshake a second longer, then gave a single nod. Just make sure it stays right. He turned and began to walk away, fading back into the swirl of the gala like a general returning to his command. Graham looked down at the folder again, his fingers tightened around it, not out of possession, but responsibility. The room around him moved forward, but inside everything had stilled, not because he had been given redemption, because he had to earn it now. Henry, still seated beside him, glanced over. You gonna cry or get to work? The old vet asked, half joking. Graham laughed softly, the first real laugh he'd let out in days. I'm thinking, he said. Don't think too long, Henry muttered, turning his chair. That contract's got 6 vehicles, and you already wasted a whole day trying to keep one out of someone's hands. The truth in that stung. But it also settled in. Graham nodded, tucked the folder under one arm, and began pushing Henry toward the exit. This time with purpose. Not for show, not for optics, for the work. The ballroom had mostly emptied. Tables stood half cleared. Chairs were being stacked by quiet volunteers. But near the far windows where the city lights glittered just beyond the glass, Jasmine Crockett remained. She wasn't making a speech. She wasn't holding court. She stood with her husband Marcus, quietly watching as the last veterans made their way out of the gala they had helped build. And maybe that was the point. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply stays. And still, the air held weight, because what had happened inside that room wasn't just a fundraiser. It wasn't just Graham's reckoning or Henry's healing or a political reversal. It was something rarer, a clear human confrontation with a truth too many refused to say aloud. Not just in showrooms or offices or elections, but in restaurants, coffee shops, sidewalks, school board meetings. America isn't suffering from too much difference. It's suffering from too little respect. That's what Jasmine had always believed, even when people called her naive, even when machines told her to retaliate, to go harder, to weaponize media. But she never did, because the problem wasn't difference. It was what people do with it. They saw a different belief in assumed corruption. Graham Ellis wasn't unique. He was simply another man who thought political difference was permission for personal cruelty. And Jasmine had seen it before. She'd read about it in a Colorado courtroom, where a baker refused to make a cake for a same-sex wedding. Not because of the cost, but because of conviction. It escalated to the Supreme Court. People called it religious freedom. Others called it public service denial. But the truth was simpler. It was one human being deciding another's dignity could be debated. She'd seen it again, in a Starbucks in Philadelphia, where two black men were arrested for sitting without ordering, not loitering, not disruptive, just waiting. But suspicion didn't need reason. It just needed bias, wrapped in company policy. In Florida, a high school teacher who gave extra credit for attending political rallies, as long as they weren't left-leaning. In California, a pro-life student told to remove her t-shirt because it made people uncomfortable. Across the nation, political identity was becoming something more volatile than even race or religion. It was becoming a filter for basic humanity. Either you aligned or you didn't deserve service, didn't deserve fairness, didn't deserve presence. And Jasmine, she had lived both sides of that tension. She had walked into liberal spaces as a moderate Democrat and been told she was not progressive enough. She had walked into conservative spaces as a woman of color and been told implicitly, "You're lucky we let you in." But she never turned those moments into viral videos, never called reporters, never went on cable TV screaming, because what she and Marcus believed didn't need noise. It needed principle. That's why when Graham tried to humiliate her, they didn't sue, they didn't shame, they didn't clap back. They acted deliberately, quietly, sharply. They let character speak where the culture had learned only to shout. Marcus had always told her, the strongest stand is the one that doesn't flinch, and tonight had proven it again. When he stepped into that dealership, he didn't try to punish, he tried to correct. When he offered Graham the SUV contract, it wasn't a bribe, it was a burden. It said, now prove you're better than the version of yourself you were yesterday. Because real justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like responsibility. And Jasmine had learned that the hard way. Years ago, when she was still practicing law in Texas, she represented a veteran denied housing because of an old charge that had been dismissed. No felony, no conviction, just a line on a report. A landlord told her client, "We don't take chances." Jasmine fought for months to clear his name. Eventually, she won. Not because she yelled louder, but because she knew how to outlast the system without becoming bitter inside it. And that's what people still didn't understand. This wasn't about cars, or sales, or even politics. It was about what kind of country we want to be when no one is filming. Do we welcome people who disagree with us? Do we serve people we wouldn't vote for? Do we look strangers in the eye and say, "You matter, even if I don't understand you"? For Jasmine, the answer had to be yes. And tonight, something had shifted. Not everything, not forever, but enough. Because Graham Ellis had walked into that room still defensive, walked out humbled. Because Henry Morales, who had seen the worst of war, had found unexpected kindness in a man who once wouldn't serve as advocate. Because donors who had been skeptical were now asking for her next speaking date. And because Marcus, her anchor, had proven again, there's no louder message than integrity followed through. As the last of the guests left, Jasmine looked up. Marcus was walking back toward her from the coat check. He carried both their jackets. No entourage, no spotlight, just a tired man with pride behind his eyes. "Ready?" he asked softly. She nodded. They exited through the Hyatt's main doors, stepping into the cool night air of Washington, D.C. The street hummed with distant sirens and late-night taxis. City lights blinked across the river, and somewhere in the silence between them, Jasmine said quietly, "You did good tonight." Marcus smiled. "So did you." They stood there for a moment longer, coats draped over their arms, watching the last valet bring up a bronze SUV for one of the donors. Jasmine exhaled slowly, then added, "Do you think it'll matter?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "It already does." She looked at him. He looked forward. Someone like Graham walks into a room like that, thinking he knows how the world works. And then he meets Henry, and you, and no one shames him. No one lectures him. They just make him see. He turned to her. "And if he changes because of that, then it matters." Jasmine nodded, finally putting on her coat. Because he was right. The story didn't need to go viral to be real. The moment didn't need to be televised to be true. It just had to happen. And hold. And tonight, it did. America might be torn in many ways, but as long as people like Jasmine and Marcus stood their ground, not loudly but clearly, there was hope. Not that the country would agree, but that it might finally remember how to disagree with decency. And maybe that was the beginning of something greater than any election could deliver. Maybe that was the beginning of repair. A week had passed since the gala, but the air around the Crockett home still felt charged with something more than memory. Jasmine could feel it as she moved through her quiet morning routine. There was no press release, no interview recap, no viral clip echoing in her notifications. And that was exactly how she wanted it, because what happened that night didn't need to be broadcast. It had done what it was meant to do. Not just to Graham Ellis, not just to the room full of donors and veterans, but to something larger, the invisible space between difference and dignity. That space had shifted. By late afternoon, the skies over Washington were heavy with pale clouds, casting a matte silver light over the city. Jasmine stood by the window of their two-story home, sipping black tea slowly from a ceramic mug, her eyes trailing the driveway below. Leaves were scattered across the slate pavers, crisp, gold, untouched. The house was still. Marcus was on a call in the back office, his voice low, steady. Then she heard it, not loud, not abrupt, but deep, smooth, like a whisper from a machine that knew its worth. A Mercedes-Benz 63 AMG coupe, obsidian black with chrome trim, rolled silently through the gates and into the driveway. It didn't announce itself. It didn't need to. Its presence alone said everything. Sleek, muscular, elegant, without showmanship, it glided forward as though it had been summoned not by money, but by meaning. A suited delivery agent stepped out with practiced grace. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the bell. He simply walked to the passenger side, opened the door, and held it open. Marcus appeared on the porch a moment later, slipping on a dark wool coat over his shirt. His steps were deliberate, unhurried, almost solemn. No grin of pride, no swagger. Just a man, approaching a vehicle that had become more than metal and horsepower. He ran his hand along the roofline, fingers brushing the flawless finish, eyes narrowing just slightly. Jasmine opened the door behind him and joined him on the stone path. "They said delivery would be next week," she said, arms folded against the wind. Marcus didn't look away from the car. "Some things come faster when you move with the right kind of silence." She tilted her head. "So this is it?" He nodded. "Exactly as you wanted. Black, clean, no flash." The car gleamed under the gray sky, understated, yet imposing. Jasmine walked around to the front, rested her hand just above the emblem. "It's beautiful," she admitted, "but I don't know if it matters anymore." Marcus turned to her. "It matters because it didn't become the point." She looked at him, curious. He stepped beside her, voice quiet, but anchored with conviction. You didn't let this car become a symbol of victory. You never wanted to prove you could buy it. You wanted to prove no one had the right to deny it.